You are now live.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the public input meeting for the Annapolis City's comprehensive plan. We have Alderman Rob Savage here to discuss his thoughts on the plan tonight, and we also have Eric Lashinsky from the Office of Planning to give us some details on what they've prepared so far and to get your input. So we're very thankful and grateful to have you here to give input. I'm going to just review the agenda and go through a little bit of housekeeping. So we will hear from Alderman Savage for about 15 minutes to talk about the big issues that they have already discussed in their Environmental Matters Committee. And then Eric Lashinsky will provide an overview of the comp plan process, the status, the structure, how it addresses environmental concerns, and give us some examples of recommendations that are in there. We also want to hear from you in the chat box as both of them are speaking. And then we're going to move to a discussion where you can unmute yourselves and give your thoughts and feedback on the plan. And then we're going to have a brief discussion by an ad hoc working group that the Environmental Commission has been working with. And then we'll have a moderated discussion for about 45 minutes, or I guess 40 minutes after that presentation. And then we're going to let Eric wrap it up and talk about next steps for about the last 5 minutes, because, you know, as always happens, everybody has great thoughts after we get this discussion flowing. So we want you to be able to weigh in afterwards as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping, the obligatory housekeeping. Just put yourselves on mute when you're not speaking. To raise hands, you go down to the lower right hand part of your screen and look at the little reactions button. Click that, and that's how you raise your hand, and we'll call on you in order of hands raised. Just remember to put your questions and comments in the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the chat box and, you know, maybe throwing some questions or comments to Rob and Eric as they present, just clarifying questions. So our goals tonight are to really get your public input. And I know many of you have been involved for many years in protecting and improving the environment in the city. And you've seen how development has played out in the past. And so you know where the pain points are for environmentalists and what gaps we need to fill to make sure the environment is balanced with development. So tonight we really want to get your ideas on the goals and the actions and implementation and linkages for this plan that will guide development, and also on the flip side, conservation for the next 10 years for the city. So Eric, let me turn it over to you to mention anything else, any goals.
Yeah, I'm going to give the bulk of my presentation following Alderman Savage, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I really appreciate everybody joining tonight. We got the word out to a lot of people. This is sort of the brain trust of environmental advocacy, I guess, for the city. And we have other folks from city planning and zoning and city manager's office here, Jackie Guild, the Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability, Sally Nash, our Director of Planning and Zoning, and Eric Borchers, a comprehensive planner here in our department that I work closely with. And I don't know if Racine Hodo is here, but she's works with Jackie. So I'm just going to hand it over to Alderman Savage, but yeah, thanks everyone for joining tonight, and look forward to the input.
Well, thanks, Eric, and thank you, Bevan, for the invitation. You know, I think I've been lost in just a slew of meetings on the comp plan, on budget, and all this legislation we have. That I thought I only had 5 minutes, but you know, I'm a politician now, so I can certainly talk for as long as you need me to. But you know, really, I just want to hear from all of you tonight. I'm going to stay on as long as I can, you know, because I think that's really the way to I like the direction that planning and zoning has been going this time. And well, this is the first comp plan that I've been involved in from the outside. Although I guess I'm kind of inside now too, but previously when I was a staff person. But the point is, I think it's really great that they're trying to get the buy-in from community and from the council as well. And Eric's before, I think, summarized how many public meetings they've done, and it's really been impressive. So, I think all of you understand the importance of the comp plan. This is every 15 years or so, I think, that we as a city have to put this together.
10.
And 10 years. And so it guides not only the land use policy, but also general policy. We had a lot of policy in there regarding climate change last time in the previous or current comp plan. And I think in terms of how that stuff gets implemented, we really want to look at what the role that plan plays for the council. With these goals are something I think the community looks at and guides overall vision and direction for the city, but also for the council. And the planning zone has tried to include, and I know they're working on a number of policies, recommendations to actually include in the comp plan. So that's really something that I think we need to, and I know Alderman Arnett said this before, we really need to have a copy of those on our desks for the council to look at every time, because I think implementation, which I'll get into a little bit later, is kind of where some of the challenge is with all of this. But for my remarks, I'm going to try to stay really big picture. I'm not going to get into too many specifics in terms of specific policies. I'll mention a few, but I want to just hear some of the specifics that are going to be coming from all of you. And but we did meet as Environmental Matters Committee, which I'll also get into a little bit. But all that said, that's really why we need to get this right and set the right goals and the right policies coming out of that. And really where we are right now, there's a need, I think, for a lot of really monumental shifts that we have to make, be it climate change or getting on the path to increasing our tree canopy, improving our water quality. These are really still very enormous challenges we have. So for climate change, we have two challenges of adaptability and resilience. And then we have, on the other hand, how do we achieve carbon neutrality? So for adaptability and resilience, we have to look at, I think, just beyond. We've put a lot of attention downtown in terms of looking at the cultural resources and which one of those are at risk, how we can protect them. We've looked a little bit at Eastport, but I think we need to look beyond that. We have a lot of other waterfront in the ward I represent. On the other side of Back Creek, we have some on obviously in West Annapolis area, and so we have a lot of waterfront that we need to, I think, look at to do some risk assessments and figure out a way forward. And obviously, that there's going to be a challenge with the new development in terms of if and how we want to allow development to happen in the floodplain, and how that meshes with allowing wetland expansion, which is also going to, as the sea levels rise, it's going to impact water quality because we do lose some of our existing wetlands because of that. And, we have to figure out planning things to make sure people don't just bulkhead and block off their waterfront as opposed to putting in living shoreline. And then there's also the change in weather patterns that we have on the resilience front, which I think we all know is impacting the runoff and increasing the amount of pollution and really making our stormwater measures that we have installed a lot less effective than they originally were intended to be. So the other part of the climate change I mentioned is carbon neutrality. And we do have a goal of 2050 to achieve carbon neutrality. I think we should look at making something a bit more aggressive. I think in many regards, we've met that goal, or we've come very close. I think a deputy city manager, Guild, is working on a report for the energy inventory. It'll be interesting to see how close we have come to meeting our 50% reduction goal for the government. But in any case, we also need to, again, that's part of shifting to a whole new model, but how do we achieve that carbon neutrality, both in the municipal, but also residential front? And as we mentioned at the council meeting on Monday, or was it? Yeah, Monday, we were talking about electric vehicles and needing to really shift to a completely different model for not only the municipal operations, but for the public as well. There's a lot of infrastructure, which Plan and Zoning has mentioned a lot of, But as a new as an EV vehicle owner for a year and a half, I think, personally, I rarely ever use chargers outside of my home unless I'm traveling. And so for locally, we have to look at how do we adjust our communities to allow for residential charging, and how do we allow multifamily complexes to require that they provide charging for the residents, that kind of thing. So other big challenge we have, forests and trees, right? In terms of, we do have some recently passed laws that we've really, again, the strongest we've seen in the state. And but those are still just recently passed, and we need to see how they work. And some of the preliminary information we have from our tree canopy study, and update to that, is that we have been experiencing, we have lost forest cover since we made the goal, and that goal was in the previous, the current comp plan. And so that shows we still have some areas. Well, hopefully the laws will help us catch up. But I think in our discussions with plan and zoning, I think we have identified some areas that still need some tree protection laws, such as backyards. If somebody has a 24-inch or larger tree in the backyard, they don't have to get any kind of permit to remove them unless they're in a critical area. And so that's something I'm looking to try to improve. And so I think identifying strong policies to really reverse that forest loss is going to be important with this comp plan. The third component of where we're seeing the big issue for environmentalists is water quality, and that's all stormwater, and part of that is going to be the impervious surface. In terms of, do we want to have any kind of a cap on impervious surfaces? Do we want to have another goal for reducing those surfaces? We have a really great restoration program for stream restoration. They're really starting to pick up, both thanks to really the public who got the ball rolling on those restoration projects. And I think the city is starting to catch up here. And I think we have what's going to be the largest restoration project that's in the works right now on headwaters of Back Creek. But so the other part of the restorations, though, is again looking at the old properties, the Watergate apartments, Spa Cove apartments, Annapolis Roads apartments, all these developments that predate our stormwater management, but they have zero treatment. So how are we what kind of policies can we implement to either incentivize or maybe force them eventually, have an escalating fee, some kind of policy that's going to force them to install, maybe partner with the city to install some kind of improvements and retrofits on their property, because we really can't meet these goals without some of those, getting some of these older properties on board. So clearly we need to keep moving forward. These environmental problems are still out there, and we really, I think, can't slow down the pace. And I think the comp plan is really going to help a lot with that. So as I mentioned, the Environmental Matters Committee has started. We've had 2 meetings, I think 4 hours or more with the planning and zoning so far. And we went through the whole comp plan. The only section we didn't hit yet is the water resources. That's going to be our last meeting, the most important. So it's probably going to take some time as well. But we're seeking to refine some of the goals and also try to find some synergy between them, and work on the policy recommendations a bit more. And so what I mean by some of that, in terms of the synergy between the goals, we've seen with the current plan, we had that tree canopy goal on the books for the past 10, 15 years. But we weren't able to meet that. And I think some of the policy goals at the time, I think focused a lot on tree plantings, but didn't really focus too much on where at the time we were seeing a majority of our forest loss, which was new development. And so that's where I think some of the goals, if we can't talk about needing to expand our borders and do infill development on forested lots, while at the same time talk about needing to meet our tree canopy goal. So I think it's really important to make sure we don't have any contradiction between them and moving forward. And so in terms of, let's see, the impervious surface is another example where we set a goal but weren't quite able to meet that in terms of the reduction. And so a few ideas we mentioned in the committee. Let's see. Oh, so one idea we have, which we mentioned the plan and zoning for the Forest Drive sector study, which they have included in this comp plan, are what they're calling green opportunity areas or green enhancement areas. And just an example of that would be something like think of the giant shopping center. There's a huge parking lot which is rarely filled, and maybe we need to look at turning that into either a transit hub for mobility, or we could actually just take out some of the pavement, put in stormwater management treatment. We could put in some trees, anything like that. But there are plenty of properties around the city that probably have too much parking. And again, I mentioned all the old apartment complexes. There are also some forests that may need to get protected, forested lots or open lots, which could be opportunity areas for putting in stormwater treatment or reforestation. So I think those are key areas that we can label as green enhancement areas and connect it with our Greenway plan. That's also going to be incorporated into the comp plan. And one other thing, I guess, about topics, one other specific topic I wanted to point out had to do with easements, because we had a lot of conversation with a planning and zoning on easements, because at one point it was mentioned about wanting to look at their goal is to try to further reforestation and to allow homeowners to feel more open to allow trees to be planted on their properties. And there's some discussion about whether or not the current easement setup with conservation easements is discouraging people or not. And I was explaining to planning and zoning that that's a much more, I think, detailed conversation we need to have, longer conversation we need to have, including with the community, I think, about the role that these perpetual easements play. In some cases, they're actually requirements of the Forest Conservation Act or critical area, but how can we look to maybe expanding our mitigation options as opposed to adjusting the easements? So one thing I'll end with just talking about implementation real briefly, just to say that's really, I mentioned that's really the key, is to make sure that we have all these groups, not just the planning and zoning staff, but also all the commissions like the planning commission and also, of course, the city council really working towards implementation of these goals. And that's really one thing for me. I'm going to try to use this as a guiding document for if for my next term in the council, to really use that to guide some of the policies that I'm going to be working on with staff and others. So that's all I have. So thank you for the time, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Alderman Savage. Let's see. We've got a comment in here about Spot Grove being a great partner for rain gardens and things like that. So all funded by grants. So it looks like that we do have some good examples that maybe we could add to the comp plan. So thanks for that in the chat, and we will be saving the chat. So if you've got some great information, please go ahead and put it in there. Let's see. Let me hand it over to Eric now and let him give us an overview of what's in there, the high points of the environmental elements in the plan there, and we'll get to the other chat points. I think Eric might cover some of them as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bevan, and thanks for the introduction, Alderman Savage. I'll try to be brief. The agenda is sort of designed to keep me from talking long. I can do that. I could talk for hours about the comprehensive plan. It's challenging to be brief about it. If you've seen any of my other presentations, I shared a link to the comprehensive plan website in the chat box. That's really where you should keep an eye on updates in the process after tonight. I came on board here in my role last summer, so I'm kind of coming up on a year anniversary soon. Hard to believe. I moved back to Annapolis after about 25 years away, and it's been fascinating kind of seeing everything with new eyes, wildlife corridors that I didn't remember or maybe weren't as active as they were back then. a lot of trails that don't exist anymore that I used to use, or, that have been blocked off, or, I kind of grew up walking down to Hawkins Cove along an old rail line, from where I grew up. And, so there's clearly a lot of need for improvement on the environmental front, and in kind of starting to think about the process, it was pretty clear to me that environmental goals would have to be kind of woven through the comprehensive plan. I think I don't know if you can see me while I'm presenting, but I'm holding up the 2009 comprehensive plan. That's really the starting point for this process. As the alderman said, this happens every 10 years. And I'm looking back at what we were saying 10 years ago and seeing how things have changed, and trying to figure out where we're heading over the next 10 to 20 years. The process started, actually in 2019. This schedule kind of picks up in November. I gave a presentation in November 2020 on kind of the existing conditions that we were looking at, kind of our analysis of the city and the directions that was pointing us to. I think the big takeaway here is that the goals, metrics, recommendations is a really significant component of the comprehensive plan. That's kind of the guidance moving forward. Elected officials, community members, boards and commissions, people want to invest in the city. That's their guidance. And what complements that is narrative that kind of goes into existing conditions that have kind of pointed us in that direction. We're looking at the end of this month to release kind of a substantial draft of these goals, metrics, and recommendations for public review. And that'll be done on our website. And we'll be providing a way for folks to comment on those. At the same time, we're going to continue meeting with interested groups. I mentioned civic associations or issue-specific meetings like this, to the degree that there's an interest. We've met with a lot of groups already, and I did share in some past presentations just how many meetings we've had, and COVID has obviously thrown a wrench in our ability to connect with people, but we've done a ton of online meetings since the last in-person meeting was a year from March, I believe, or a year from February. I had my first in-person meetings recently in over a year. Felt good, a sense of normalcy. So hopefully we can get back to that at some point. But in late August, the goal would be to have something that looks more like a plan document that has the narrative and it feels like something that approximates the plan. And then that would also be available for public review and ample time, likely a 60-day review period. And the adoption process is another story. We need to figure out when that might happen. But the main thing is we're trying to get to a draft comprehensive plan. And so hopefully folks were able to see the presentation that was shared on the calendar invite. That's a summary of where we're at. It's not the plan itself, but it includes a lot of essentially includes the draft goals, metrics, recommendations that we have thus far. It has some of the more compelling imagery that we think helps tell the story of our current conditions. And that's what I'm going to use tonight. I added a few images here just in the beginning, just to kind of expand on that. But if you're not familiar with the comprehensive plan process, this is one way of explaining it. The land use, how we use the city's land, and the best way of sort of developing in the city is really the core of this plan. And then it's surrounded by these element plans, which are kind of focused on specific topics like transportation or housing or water resources. And then outside of that, towards the end of the document, we have guidance on how to actually implement the recommendations. And so even though we're talking about environmental issues tonight, I'm a comprehensive planner. I focus on a holistic view of the city where everything is really interrelated. I know I'm probably not the only one that sees things that way here tonight. We're not going to make a dent in our response to climate change unless we see a dramatic change in how we move around the city, the kinds of ways that we move, and or all the work that we're putting into water access, public water access. If we're not focusing on making sure we have clean water and managing stormwater, it's not going to have the same sort of impact. And there's a million examples of how these things interrelate. This list on the left is the element plans of the comprehensive plan. Most of them are mandated by the state. And then on the right are just some of the major issues that I've been involved with since being in my role here, and just trying to show how these element plans connect to the big issues across. They're kind of cross-cutting in the way they work. For the comprehensive plan structure, we came up with a set of kind of visions for the city: the thriving city, the functional city, adaptive city. These are ways of talking about the kind of city that we want in the future. We may have some glimpse of today, but we're trying to improve on. And we came up with principles under each of these visions. So they're listed here. And the idea is that these principles are kind of the guiding framework for the comprehensive plan, where all of our goals and metrics and recommendations should sort of refer back to these principles.
So
and
Eric,
then
there was a comment in the chat about structure. So I just wanted to
Sure.
hold you right there and talk about structure. Somebody mentioned is environment a subset of land use? And there's a section called land use, and why isn't there a section called land conservation?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I'll
just a comment.
That's a good comment. I'm going to have a slide in a moment that kind of shows how environmental sustainability is kind of woven through the comp plan. These are element plans that are mandated by the State Department of Planning for Maryland. They've been around for a while. They kind of get changed here and there. We have some flexibility in how we organize our chapters as long as we address these core elements. But we found, from past experience, that kind of being clear about how we are addressing those core elements is important. The plan has to be approved by the state. The more we sort of play with different wording and kind of weave their core elements into alternative chapters and such, it becomes confusing. So we can definitely talk about structure more tonight, but I'll just kind of show where, the way we're setting up now. And, this is how it fits in terms of the chapter structure. The goals, metrics, and recommendations are basically designed for each chapter, kind of tailored to the individual element plans. And so when we look at how environmental goals or environmental sustainability is woven into the structure, these are the 5 elements or the 5 chapters where there's I would say, primary focus or significant focus. And I tried to list out the types of topics that would be addressed in those chapters. And so you get a sense of, I may have forgotten something here, but we're trying to cover every angle of the city's environment. And and how we treat that environment, in these chapters. And so it gets dispersed. And so something like land conservation would fall in a couple of places. It's going to fall into land use, where we introduce the idea of the Greenway system. We introduce environmental enhancement areas as kind of a new designation for land use in our future land use map. Community facilities, we talk about the greenways and the idea of linking our park system with our conservation system, which are kind of two separate things today. And I think it limits the visibility of our conservation efforts, which are significant. I think, we were a kind of pioneering city in creating the Annapolis Conservation Board, or Conservancy Board. So we're trying to make sure that they have a significant role here moving forward. And then the sensitive areas, conservation is definitely one of those core strategies to reinforcing our coastal areas and stream banks leading into our creeks. So you could also, I think it shows up in water resources as well, related to stormwater management.
So we had two clarifying questions. What does municipal growth mean, and what's an environmental enhancement area?
Sure. Municipal growth, I could have identified that here too. I mean, we certainly talked at length about it with the Environmental Matters Committee of City Council recently, because how we grow, growth is a sort of, it's a vague term. You really need to kind of put some parameters on it. Well, we're talking within comprehensive planning, it means a few things. It means the population that will grow here in Annapolis. It means where new development will happen and where it should happen. It means sort of the kinds of economic investment that happen, certain types of businesses that we would like to see more of here. There was a need or an interest in. So, those are kind of the ways in which we talk about municipal growth, and we try to be strategic about that, particularly since we don't really have anywhere. We're not growing outward here in Annapolis.
Right. I think that maybe that was part of the question was, does it mean we're annexing, or is it growth within our existing borders too?
Yeah, there's a very limited area that we identify as sensible for annexation. Essentially there's some inholdings within the city that would make sense, to make service more efficient, service being like environmental, emergency management, or fire, or, in some cases people want better water service, and so that's a reason to be annexed. But we identify those in the comprehensive plan, but there's very few. There's a few at the edge of the city along Route 2 that makes sense for the city to annex. And the annexation process is complicated and lengthy, and really annexation doesn't happen very often, but we just have to be clear about where those opportunities are. Sorry, what was the other question?
Let's see, it was municipal growth, and then what was the enhancement area? What are they?
Right. This was an idea that came out of the Forest Drive Eastport sector study, and then kind of reinforced in the Forest Drive Eastport sector study task force that just sort of wrapped up. This idea that there are places that should be identified as where we would invest in improving or preserving the environmental resources there. So, I think a lot of them are places that are kind of greenfield sites that haven't been developed, that have environmental value, that and frankly may not even make sense to be developable. But they're not necessarily park spaces either. And so there's a category of land that fits that, and we hadn't really been identifying those types of places on our past land use maps. So it's a new land use designation. Historically, green spaces were just identified as parks or open spaces, and so we're trying to be more specific. The alderman mentioned, places that have high impervious area, as maybe another opportunity and that's true. I mean, there's places where it's clear, they're not performing well environmentally, and there should be some improvement. So large parking lots that aren't needed as to the degree they maybe used to be. And
okay. All right, and I want to let you finish because we are running a little bit late, and then we do want to open it up for questions. But go ahead. Go ahead and finish.
Yeah, just 3 more slides.
Linkages were good. Yeah.
This is just an example. I think if you were able to look at the presentation that was shared, you would have seen a number of slides that look kind of like this. And this is just an example of how we're setting up the goals, metrics, and recommendations, this sort of relationship between those things. This one is taken from the sensitive areas chapter, I believe, relates to tree canopy, which is a huge topic. It's one of those cross-cutting issues that could really address everything from health outcomes to stormwater management. So there's a reason why it has 7 recommended actions, if not more. It may have more, this particular goal, and as we move forward, and maybe some of you have some thoughts tonight. This is a kind of key that it hasn't been included in past comp plans, so at least not in the 2009 comp plan, but it's kind of like a way of summarizing all of the recommendations that we put into these chapters. At the end of the comprehensive plan, we would have these types of charts for each chapter that really summarize the recommended actions, the metrics, relative time frame, level of investment, responsibility, kind of efficiencies in terms of related to other recommendations, and status update. So it helps us be accountable and make sure we're tracking what we're doing. And then finally, I know things might be sobering tonight, in our discussion, because there is a lot of work to do here. But I wanted to highlight just some good news, or I don't know, ongoing work highlights that I'm excited about. This is just 10 examples that came to mind. This summer, we're launching a federally funded resilience study that is being funded by the Department of Defense. It's basically looking at the Annapolis area from the starting point of, the Naval Academy naval installation is here. We want it to stay here. We want it protected, and we need to look kind of holistically at the region to understand our risks and how to be more prepared. And there's a few key, scope items within that are more specific, but that we have a consultant selected for that and should be kicking off pretty soon. So stay tuned. A replant initiative similar to the watershed stewards replant in Arundel was announced on Earth Day by the mayor. It's something that we'd already been planning to put in the comprehensive plan. So the mayor kind of beat us to that, but it's could be really impactful. Hawkins Cove restoration is something that Jackie is leading, and that should be moving forward. And a lot of work has gone into that so far by the Spot Creek Conservancy and other partners. The Conservancy Board launched a Greenways survey several months ago in the fall. Our department has been taking all the input on that, refining it, making a more clear database and map that will be in the comprehensive plan. I mentioned these environmental enhancement areas as a new land use designation. We're pursuing funding opportunities for Eastport flood mitigation plan and Truxton Park restoration, which is sorely needed. And the Truxton Park work would build off of what's happening at Hawkins Cove, and it's obviously connected. We're continuing to resolve the issue at Wells Cove. So stay tuned for that. The Cars Beach remnant is along Bemby Beach Road. There's a development plan for that would have a public beach component, but we're also looking at a larger conservation initiative for that whole site as well. Curbside composting is something that Jackie's office has also been spending a lot of time developing, and that's been funded for the next fiscal year. And then we're working really closely with BG&E to expand EV charging access and figuring out how the city can help to do that with them. So I'm going to leave it there, kind of long-winded, but we can break. I'm going to hand it back to you, Bevan.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we have generated a lot of good comments and a lot of, good questions in the chat. I do want to offer people the chance to unmute yourself and ask your questions. I know Earl had a very good question and a very kind of overarching question in there about the sort of the conflict between different goals in the comprehensive plan. I know this is something that Rob talked about with us before as well. And we've all noted that there are conflicting goals in the plans about development and redevelopment, infill development, and then conservation of land for economic benefit, for environmental benefit, for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So how do we handle them? How do other plans handle those conflicting goals? And I'll encourage people to go to those reactions tab and just put your hand up if you want to ask your own question. If you don't, I will ask the questions in the chat, but I will look for your hands to go up.
I would say we talked about this quite a bit with the Environmental Matters Committee. By the way, I'm going to use this whiteboard as a way of tracking things that are shared, and this will be kind of a record of the conversation. So infill development is really the way we're approaching new development in the city. There's a lot of sites in the city that are not performing well environmentally or fiscally, or they're not contributing to the city in a way that they could, and they don't have the kind of compatible uses that might benefit the neighbors. I hear about this all the time. That seems like the one thing people can agree on is they want more walkable places. They want to be able to walk to their needs, services and needs. So that's just to clarify, when we talk about new development, and that's really our primary focus is on redevelopment of existing sites that could just be doing much better in the city. There are some greenfield sites, very few though. A lot of these are, I would call a lot of the development opportunities in the city are grayfield sites that I would hope, and we do have the legislation in place that makes sure when something comes in, that they're going to be doing something that's much more environmentally sound than what's there today. So,
right. And I think, a specific example might be a redevelopment a proposal we just saw where they were going to redevelop a lot, but they were really big old trees out in the front, and they wanted to move the building up, and then you wouldn't be able to, replant a tree. Well, first of all, they wanted to take the trees down. Then you wouldn't be able to replant the trees, large canopy trees, because they're moving the building up. So, it seems like redevelopment always wins out over saving the tree, or even saving the space for the tree to grow so it doesn't interfere with the power lines, things like that. So it just seems like every time you get those kind of situations, those conflicting goals of redevelopment and saving large canopy trees, the redevelopment wins out. So I think there needs to be some language, some balancing of goals in there, so to give guidance to, the planning the planning commission and, you know, when they're making those kind of decisions. Let's see, I have a hand up, John Butler. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. John Butler, I see your hand up. Can you unmute yourself? Let's see, John, we don't hear you. Let's see. Also regarding trees, I'll just mention the tree canopy seems to be covered in a lot of places with ivy that is, you know, killing the trees and bringing them down. So I think that might go under strategies for increasing our tree canopy or preserving what we do have. So I think that's a good comment about, you know, preserving the spaces that we do have as well, you know. I mean, we've seen over the years and recently and probably currently today, some proposals for the city to sell land, city-owned land, recreation land for development. And so how do we balance the, you know, the need for more housing and maybe, you know, more affordable housing with preserving our recreation and open spaces that, as we all have seen during COVID, were pretty much a lifeline for everybody in the whole community. So,
you know, I want to say, you know, the affordable housing is clearly, you know, one of these existential crises that we're dealing with in the city. That I at least I think of it that way. You know, we can't move forward as a city without a kind of diverse population, and that's, you know, we look at that along all kinds of criteria, but certainly income is one of those. And there's a lot of things that, you know, could help to increase the types of housing options that are out there. I think when we talk about compact and connected development or mixed use development, you know, one of the primary interests there is in creating a zoning code that allows for, you know, what I think of as light density, you know, duplexes or triplexes or, you know, apartments over retail. There's a lot of housing types that used to exist in the city in greater supply, and we've kind of just stopped doing those things for a variety of reasons. But they're really some of the easiest ways to increase affordable housing in the city. So, and, you know, it's another sort of comprehensive way of dealing with environmental goals, in my opinion, you know, to concentrate certain uses on a smaller footprint. And, you know,
but there's also the competing goals of, okay, keep preserving open space and the city owned open space and then selling it off for housing. So I think there needs to be some guidance there, and the community needs to give input on that as well. So, you know, it does seem to, you know, to be a bit lopsided when city councils are always thinking about the income that new development brings and not the, you know, the economic benefits. I think the economic benefits of open space and preserved land and green infrastructure need to be clearly spelled out in here. So there is really a balance. But speaking of goals too, there are some questions about wetlands, and somebody has their okay, I see some hands up too. Okay, so Allison Colden, let me see. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bevan.
Okay.
So the comment I wanted to make, and I'm sort of building off of some of the comments in the chat box about paying for some of this environmental work. And I really think the comprehensive plan provides an opportunity for the city to lay out our goals and objectives related to these environmental things, because I think we're leaving a lot of state and federal grant monies untapped because the city does not have plans and goals related to things like resilience. I know we're working on that, but if we have an explicit plan that's either incorporated by reference or directly have goals related to that in the comprehensive plan, there are federal plans or federal programs that fund land conservation, that fund planned retreat programs for high water areas, that fund, flood insurance, land and water conservation fund. If we have a state plan for conserving wildlife habitat, we can tap those monies. So I really think you could use the comprehensive plan as a template to come up with the ideas that sort of serve as a draft for when we go looking for funding that's available. And I think obviously with the new federal administration in place that's putting a huge emphasis on climate resilience and climate mitigation, Annapolis really has an opportunity to serve as an example and to be a leader in this space if we are able to clearly articulate what our city's goals are relative to resilience and climate change.
Yeah, LWCF is something I have been looking at recently, actually related to Truxton Park. I think it would be a really great fit for that with the ecological goals, but also, trail access,
Right.
erosion, obviously. Big issue.
So under goals, I mean, is Allison, would you say that a goal is to have a resiliency plan, or resilience should be one of the goals, and then have some specific actions in this plan?
I know Jackie's on the call, and I'm not sure what the timeline is of the resilience plan relative to the comp plan, but I really think, if it's not going to be completed before the end of the comp plan to be incorporated sort of by reference, then maybe you say that the goal is to complete the comp plan, identify the priorities, and then implement them. We've already talked about how important including implementation, sort of accountability and backup in the comp plan is. So
Right.
I think the timeline will really drive what the specific wording is. But I think this is not just specific to resilience either. I think there's a lot of different areas of the environment where this is relevant. Like when we mentioned LWCF would probably not fall under like a resilience category per se.
Yeah, but there's like FEMA pre-mitigation money that you can use for, and I think resilience, I mean, there's definitely some specifics we can get in there and have it as a goal, because it's like we have the next 10 years basically to deal with adaptation to climate change. So I think we should get something in there and keep working and refining it, our actual plan. Anyway, so thanks for your input. Let's go to John Butler. We just have a couple minutes left, and I want to get to Rob Schnabel too before we hand it over to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I got my technology worked out.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So Alderman Savage talked about the great, Forest Conservation Act we have here in the city, but it's kind of, puts the onus on the landowner or the developer. I think the comprehensive planning process is a great place to be proactive. We can identify where those areas are that are going to be subject to the Forest Conservation Act and try to, do something smart with them in the comprehensive plan, because it's clearly going to be an impediment to developing those areas. We don't know, where they could replant if they cut down trees. So I think, I'm not sure how well that's currently being addressed in the comprehensive plan.
Right, and we did get those areas mapped by the city GIS. I think it was Sean Wampler mapped those areas for, for information when the council was considering the forest conservation plan. So we do have that mapped already. So
I think she mapped places where were
replant. Replant.
Possibly be planted, but many of those are not really candidates. My concern is we have lots of there's not that much forested area left, but most of the forested area that's left is not going to be really a good candidate for development because of the Forest Conservation Act. So let's address that in the comprehensive plan, maybe, that those areas, see what's connected to them.
Mhm.
I don't
Bevan,
Mhm.
can I just speak
Yeah, sure. Jump
briefly
in.
to that? So
Yeah.
yeah, on the whole, John, I think you're right. I mean, in terms of identifying places that we can do reforestation, because I think just so the community knows, I do feel that the developers right now seem to be complaining that they can't meet their mitigation. They can't meet the reforestation and places to put the trees. So I do think that we need to really look into that to see if that's actually valid, because I do think we have, John, I know you did a lot of the work. I do think we do have space to reforest. And I do think we have plenty of street tree opportunities, which is allowable to a certain degree for mitigation. We have backyards, we have plenty of school property, and that needs to be worked out with the county school board, because they have plenty of space that they're not using for active recreation. So I think there are plenty, and I'm also not sure the developers they may not be offering enough incentive to the homeowners to do replantings, because typically when you get an easement from somebody, you have to give them some money. And so I think we just need to be wary and do enough research to really figure out if there is a problem or not with the mitigation, and where it is we need and to fix it, without completely abandoning the entire reforestation practice.
Okay, thanks. So let's, Rob Schnabel, let me give you the mic. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You had some good points in the chat.
Yeah, just, first on the whole mitigation thing for forest cover. Ideally, if the city plans to annex additional lands, annexing some lands that have more open space, there's plenty of funding out there for reforesting or street-side tree plantings, just to actually improve, to actually have a net positive. So if we do decide to annex additional lands, making sure there's enough excess land to actually do trees for mitigation would be great. The limiting factor clearly is the land, but that wasn't going to be my point. I was raising my hand. I didn't see anything on in terms of open water component of clearly Annapolis. We're lucky that we have so much open water, and the water is what brings people to Annapolis. I do see shorelines in there, but it seems like over the last few years, there's been so much encroachment, whether it be docks going way out in the middle of Spa Creek. As people replace bulkheads, we continue to go further out into the water. So if there could be a component for the master plan on protecting more of the open water, and I know that falls under the jurisdiction since the state water is under MDE, but we do have a local port wardens, and there are local permits that are required. So we really need to do a better job of protecting the open water and how far folks can encroach up to the harbor line and protect, and perhaps expanding that width away from the harbor line to maintain that open water access for recreation, for visuals, for all of the above.
All right, good point. Thanks, Rob. Betsy Love, did you have your hand raised? I think I see it raised.
Yes, I did.
Go ahead. Hi.
I wanted to say that we should recognize that there are sources for outside income from the state and federal sources and grants as well for waterway restoration, and that encompasses resiliency features as well. It's not just a water quality project, but when you restore a watershed, you get a multitude of resiliency features like flood management, stabilization of shoreline where flood tides are absorbed. You get groundwater production, cooling water for fish. When we go through these incredibly hot drought summers where fish are trying to find cool water, they find it in these restorations. So, there's resiliency funding there, as well as water quality aspects achieved in the Chesapeake Bay program funding sources.
All right, thanks, Betsy. I also wanted to mention before I turn it over to Barbara and the ad hoc working group, Zoe Johnson had a good comment in here about wanting to see some of the underlying objectives of some of the goals. And an example was under land conservation, missing was a specific mention of protecting key habitats, wetlands, natives, or ESA species. Also wanted to see air quality as a goal mentioned and the objective under a tree canopy, and it could be linked to the transportation goal. So thanks for that. So yeah, I also thought air should be added as well. Let me now turn it over to this ad hoc working group that's been looking at some other cities' plans and seeing looking at what they have in there and comparing it to, you know, what they think we should have in there in our plan. And wanted to give them a few minutes to present, and then keep your feedback coming in the comments in the chat, and also you'll have opportunity to unmute yourselves and make comments on their presentation too. So Barbara, did you want to kick it off, or did Allison was going to kick it off, I believe?
You were kicking it off.
Oh.
You were
Well,
going to lead with resilience.
Oh, yeah, I thought, well,
Bevan, I'm ready if you want me to go first.
Yeah, I thought Allison was going to lead it off with climate change, why this comp plan is so important, and resilience kind of fits under there, and also make some other comments as well.
Great. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Bevan. And like Bevan said, we have this sort of ad hoc working group that's been chatting about this for a while. And I just wanted to take a quick couple minutes. Of course, some of the information I'm going to be presenting is not news to the folks on this call, but really just sort of present the context of why our group has thought that actually centering environmental sustainability is so important to the comp plan. So, you know, we saw that sort of layered donut diagram that Eric showed earlier, and this will be my pitch on why maybe environmental sustainability should sort of be at the core, and we should build out from there. So Rob already mentioned earlier, we're a city surrounded by water. Our greatest assets are our land, our air, and our water. And it is really important to our economy. So Bevan mentioned earlier too, that when it comes down to development and land use in the comp plan, it's all about trade-offs, right? So when we cut down trees on a forested lot to allow for development, we are trading carbon sequestration, water filtration, sediment stabilization for housing. And, you know, sometimes those trade-offs are inevitable. We talked about it. We need places to live, we need places to work, we need places to shop. But if we are centering environmental sustainability in our decision making for every single decision that happens underneath the comp plan, we are going to do that in a way that gets us the triple bottom line that everybody's looking for of economy, employment, and environment. So hopefully we can talk about how we will get there. This is just a quick snapshot from NOAA for Anne Arundel County, showing that the ocean economy or water-based industries support more than 28,000 jobs. Of those in the middle pie charts, over 70% of those come from tourism and recreation, followed by marine construction and marine transportation. And then on the bottom right graph, we can see those jobs are not going anywhere. They are either remaining steady, like the marine construction and transportation, or the purple line shows that the recreation and tourism water related jobs are actually increasing over time. And just to put a finer point on that, on the recreation and tourism sector, this is from a 2019 study by Rockport Analytics on the value of tourism and recreation to Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. You can see in your call out box that in 2018 alone, so this is just for 1 year, Annapolis had 2.2 million visitors who had direct spending of $512 million and a total economic benefit value added of $369 million. So these are big numbers, and they're really supporting our local economy. That study found that in the absence of this tourism income, each household would have had to pay an additional $1,000 in taxes annually to cover that level of revenue brought in by recreation and tourism in the city. The other reason
Hey,
why—
Allison, can you just make your slides a little bit bigger to start the slideshow from beginning? It's hard to see those numbers, you see?
Okay, sorry.
That's
I
great
thought you guys were
information, though.
seeing my other—
Yeah, no, I'm
screen.
seeing the,
You're seeing that one.
yeah.
I don't know how I switch it.
Just hit from beginning and then it should go into slideshow mode.
Yeah, I have two monitors, so it's showing.
Oh, okay.
You're seeing my tiny screen and not
Oh,
my—
okay.
Hey,
Right.
Allison, just go to where's the share screen? You can do a new share and you should be able to select that other window.
this one.
Ah.
Is that working now? Oh wait, now I have to hit share. How about that?
Yeah,
Look at
that's there. There we go.
Thank
There we
you,
go.
Julian.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Now there's bigger numbers. All right. So, oh, there we go. Oh, my screens won't advance. Okay, there we go. So the other reason why this is so important is because the threats that our city are facing are here. They're happening now, and they are serious. So on the right-hand side, you can see sea level rise since 1950 has increased almost a foot, and over the last 10 years has been accelerating. It's expected to rise by 1 inch every 5 years if it continues on that trajectory. And then on the bottom left, anybody who's been downtown on a high tide knows that we are seeing increases in nuisance flooding in the city. And so these are things that are happening now. We need to address them in this comp plan. We can't wait another 10 years. And these are impacting things now. So 23,000 homes in the county are under threat from flooding. And it's something that we need to deal with the current levels of development, but also how we plan development for the future and where that's going to happen. We've talked about this a lot. This is from the tree canopy report that was just released. The AEC received a presentation on this at our last meeting. But what you can see in the map there is the orange hexagons represent areas where canopy has been lost. There were 107 acres of tree canopy lost in the city between 2011 and 2017. And this is just trees only. It doesn't represent the loss of other important habitats like wetlands that others have brought up on the call. So again, trees are shade, they're water filtration, they're nutrient reduction, they're carbon sequestration. We are losing tree canopy, and we are also downgrading. There was another comment in the chat about how we are trading large mature trees that get cut down, and then they're replaced with bare root twigs basically during mitigation. So it's really important that we are prioritizing not only mitigation, but also preservation, and really working through that pyramid of preservation, then mitigation, then restoration, because it's far more expensive to restore an area than it is to preserve quality habitat to begin with. And so that gets us down to the economic nitty gritty. There's a 2014 Chesapeake Bay Foundation report that determined that cleaning up our water quality in Maryland would provide $4.6 billion in annual benefits. Even if Annapolis only saw 1% of that, 4.6 billion, you're still talking about $46 million in benefits annually. But even more importantly, likely that the failure to do so would result in $700 million in losses annually. So we really think that the point to drive home here is a lot of times the justification for continued development is the need for increased revenues. And the point of this is really to show that our economy, our local economy, depends a lot on the quality of our land and our air and our water, and also that investing in our land, air, and water will pay dividends in the long run. So that's all I have, and I can turn it back over to Barbara and Bevan.
Thanks so much, Allison. Barbara, were you going to touch on sustainability now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm trying to get my screen share up.
Okay.
And while we're doing that, can I ask a
All
quick
right.
question on
Sure,
Allison's
yes, please
presentation?
jump in, yes.
Yeah, just in terms of water access, I mean, it's been a while since I've been part of the Annapolis Environmental Commission, but obviously it's been in the paper about the city not enforcing agreements with developers in terms of water access. Is there anything in the development plan to really, I mean, not just maybe one water access, if there's other water accesses that were agreed with developers to make sure to make sure this is done? I mean, what is the overall scoop on that? I've been out of the loop for a bit on this.
Right, and that is something that we are working on, Rob, and I don't, you know, other than public pressure and pressure from commissions to get the city to do that. I don't know if there's any other kind of mechanism, but I mean that should definitely be something that we put it under one of the strategies of preserving and enhancing public access. Go ahead, Eric.
Does the Annapolis Environmental Commission know of all of the areas that have been
Rob,
agreed to?
We have promoted keeping access in these development areas. So, I mean, we don't know about all the past ones, but the one that, you know, the current one that's in the paper all the time. Yeah, we were the ones that several years ago were promoting keeping access for the public as an important part of that project approval. So yeah, and we have been asking the administration, you know, what are you doing about preserving this access? We don't see it preserved here at the level that we, you know, understood it was being, the development was approved with the understanding of real public access, not just having a water taxi come up and deliver residents there, you know?
Not to get too political, but it seems like we're building the wall in Annapolis with some of these areas along the shoreline. So it does need to be a focus.
Yeah, and Rob, the other thing that I think is really a discussion we haven't had yet is, and the resilience, like what are we going to do? What are we planning to do? Are we planning to preserve and defend every inch of our property from water? Are we going to spend public dollars defending private property on water? If we do, we should be getting access and a walkway around the waterway, you know? So we haven't had those really public conversations yet, I feel. And so I think, you know, we really do need a resilience section in here, and we need to have some public conversations on a resilience plan. What can we afford to preserve? What do we intend to preserve? What areas just have to go under, you know, and what do we get back for our public investment?
And I'll just throw out information back from the 90s, back when I led the Environmental Commission, is that there was talk of having trail systems along all of our creeks, like going through along the shorelines prior to areas being developed, actually having trails going along the shorelines. And that seems to have been dropped over the years, but that would be a wonderful asset as well, clearly.
And I think, you know, having an idea like that preserved in this plan would, because I haven't heard that idea in the 7 years that I've been on the commission. So if it's not in a plan, then it's just talked about, I guess, you know, it can get dropped, but I think that's a great idea to add. So we're making a sticky note of that somewhere.
Yeah, I just, the three opportunities or strategies that I've identified or seen is really key to what you're talking about, Rob, and we're working on. In our update to the adequate public facilities ordinance as it relates to parks, we're going to be more specific about the importance of water access and anything that development can do to improve that, expand it, add it, make access to it better is there. In a lot of cases with new development or subdivision of property, you know, a stormwater easement is created, and that then becomes sort of a opportunity for public access easement, but there's no signage. You know, people don't know that that's available, that's public. So there's an opportunity to change the requirement when a property is platted, you know, and a stormwater easement is created. There should be some clarifying signage that it's not necessarily the city that's maintaining it in some cases. It may be the adjacent property owner, but the public should know that it's there. So there's examples of that we're kind of
and just ways to make it contingent upon a city approval, that is going to be the norm, that it's part of access.
Yeah, and this Greenways map, I think, is going to be really, really key because it's a pretty thorough inventory of all of these waterfront access places that aren't really formalized currently. I mean, I sometimes, I've lived in Annapolis my whole life, and I don't think of there being that many new places, but actually it opened my eyes to some that I hadn't really considered, and so I think that'll really help too, so that when a new development comes online, or, that we have this map in place that kind of shows these opportunities. So.
Right. And I would say not even just when a new development comes online. I mean, land and water conservation funding was increased by 30% this past November, I believe. Yeah. So there's more funds to go into that. So yeah,
getting
but
ahead of it.
definitely part of development and just part of the city plan too. Also, so yeah, let me hand it over to Barbara too. So great points, Rob. Thanks for jumping in. Go ahead, Barbara. I think you're keyed up now. Is this your slide?
Okay, yeah. Is that, we can see it? Great.
Yep.
Okay. Sunset from Severn Inn. The bottom line, some of what I'm presenting is a reiteration of what Allison did so artfully, but from a slightly different perspective. The bottom line is the city of Annapolis is vulnerable. We are experiencing substantial and increasing impacts from climate change. And this plan has got to be the guide for this next decade, because this is the decade that everything's got to be put in place. And if we don't do what needs to be done now, the next time we do a comp plan, we're going to be in really deep trouble. So that's part of the rationale this working group got together. We need to integrate throughout the plan the concept of environmental sustainability. Oh dear, it's not advancing. There we go. Okay, but let's, we've spent sort of tiptoeing around what a comp plan is. It is the policy document guiding long-range development for a local jurisdiction. If you take the comp plan and you use it as a framework for supporting sustaining places, for sustaining what we value in Annapolis, according to the American Planning Association, it can be, this process, a dynamic democratic process which communities plan to meet the needs current and future generations without compromising the ecosystems upon which they depend. Balancing social, economic, environmental resources, sustainability, incorporating resilience, and linking local actions to regional and global concerns. This is the ideal statement of what we could be doing. The problem is, as we all know, that I didn't think there's anybody here that hasn't had an issue of the tension between development. The comp plan is to guide development. It's to guide growth. That's its fundamental mission. But if you do that, then you have conflicting attention between environmental sustainability, equity, and health. So, and this is a cartoon it refers to Anne Arundel County, but probably appropriate for Annapolis also. The plan, as currently stated, lists resilience as one of the 3 organizing principles. There is a difference between climate resilience and environmental sustainability, and I really I hope that everybody leaves knowing the difference and use these carefully. Climate resilience focuses on risk, threats, hazards, and actions to valued assets, as well as actions to prevent, withstand, respond to, recover from negative consequences of these climate impacts, okay? So it's focused on the outcome of climate change, the impacts in our area. So it's heat island, increased temperature, we have heat island problems. Environmental sustainability focuses on all the impacts of human activity in our environment, equity, health impacts, and how these stressors produce climate change. So sustainability is in fact the broader construct and includes climate resilience actions, but is a much broader construct and one which I personally believe we need to integrate throughout our plan, and is what is done in many other comp plans. So let's take a look. One of the things the city has in its mind is promoting a new infill construction. That's the municipal growth. So they want moderately priced dwelling units, perhaps a trail connection, improve an intersection. How do we weave in and be sure that such construction integrates environmental sustainability? And on the left, I just suggest some, first, before we start any new building on new land, we really need to start a practice of doing an environmental assessment. Where are the trees and shrubs? What are the conditions? What's the soil, the habitat? And what are the net environmental losses going to be, and how they can be remediated? And then with new construction, and we're coming along on this, requiring new buildings for green building, eco-friendly materials, energy conservation. We want to have green spaces, mini parks, trees, community gardens. And then within such a development, helping to build community with community spaces for those who work at home, who are schooling, training, health and public safety, connect intermodal transportation, and a healthy environment. So that's how we take infill, but be sure that it's filtered with the environmental sustainability. And we have to do this, guys. I mean, this just came out in the paper today, in our little neighborhood, we've got at least a degree increase of temperature in the last 30 years. And our rain impact is up, close to about 10% increase in the last 30 years. So we can't just pretend like 10 years from now, it's going to be like what it is now. There's curves and it's going to get worse. And we need to ensure that for retrofit construction, that we really tighten requirements and really prepare for new properties to be environmentally responsible. So I picked on a neighbor just down the road, undergoing a retrofit.
What do you want?
Take a look at this.
This is an Annapolis comprehensive learning plan.
Liz, can you put yourself on mute? I think.
I got her.
Okay, thanks.
So on this property, it's south facing. It's good because note it's got permeable pavers for the driveway, but this is obviously a substantial retrofit of a property. I don't see solar. I don't have idea how much insulation's done, whether the windows are triple pane or whether they're going to be window treatments. But I'll tell you that sun's going to come into the facade of that house and really heat it up. I don't see a white roof, which would be needed to reflect the heat, which is not something I see anywhere in Annapolis these days. It seems like they would have wanted to encourage them to plant a canopy tree because the front of that house is going to be hot as all get out. Support native plantings, organic lawn care. So you actually, the soil is aerated so the water stays on site. So these are, it's taking a look as the planning department permits retrofitting to really tighten up the standards. It'll cost a little bit more, but the savings really will pay out in the long run. The other thing in terms of environmental sustainability, we really believe that the city's a property owner, and it should set, one of its goals is the city become a model for environmental sustainability, stewardship practices, and education, that it becomes self-conscious that it is, it owns property. And, you know, everything from its land, its buildings, weatherizing, weatherization, energy conservation. This is happening. It just needs to be encouraged more, I believe. Rob had mentioned earlier about public lands and how some of the lands should probably be left undeveloped, should remain, quote, wild. Reviewing city maintenance practices. Oh, please, let's get rid of the gas-powered leaf blowers by next year, not 2030, but begin to convert the landscaping equipment to electric or powered base, phase out cars. Again, we're working on this, as Rob's told us. And a new thing, I saw something recently on microplastics and how we're just creating a stew out there in the bay. We need to figure out if there's some kind of filtration system in our sewer outflow to capture the microplastics, because it's really, we're going downhill fast on that. A plan is only a vision, a collection of wishes and words. If it doesn't have a strong implementation component with specific action statements, timelines, metric, signed responsibilities with strong monitoring oversight. I am very pleased that Dr. Nash is supportive of that, and I hope, I encourage her to really push hard and be sure that the plan has strong implementation components. I believe it should be, as the Plan Norfolk 2030 plan has, is a whole separate section detailing a plan component. And then, as has been a theme throughout, Allison made the case about how much our environment generates and produces funds for us. We need the city to provide sufficient staffing and funding to implement plan goals, creating all sorts of new structures and ways to do funding. If these two items aren't in the plan, then it's just an exercise and not worth it. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. And this, yours and Allison's presentations just generated a lot of comments in the chat. Let's see.
Good.
Yeah. I also wanted to comment on your comments on like the city leading by example. So, you know, when we set goals, we want the city to follow these goals as well. And we know that, you know, when they are rebuilding like the new public works building right now, and they're not putting solar on the roof, you know, like, why is this not happening? How can we seriously turn to developers who are building houses and go, you should be putting solar on the roof when the city isn't even putting solar on their own new buildings. So
What about the new library?
yeah, I think that was a county building, but still it's built in the city. It's in the city, right?
It's in the city, and the
Right.
city should have said, we, environmental responsibility, and you could have tipped that roof the other direction, and you would have put solar in, and it would have been great.
Right. And then there were some questions about what are the incentives we can offer to developers to encourage green building. So
I think there's everything from, you know, a little seal, you know, on the outside, a little placard in the yard,
I think expedited permitting. I mean, permitting is a huge cost to get anything done in this city.
Right.
So if you have 5 environmental elements in there, then you get expedited permitting, because that's a real cost savings.
Right.
You know, we could think of, you know, in incentives that don't cost the city money as well. There was also a comment in here, I think Kurt Riegel made the comment that we just have really auto-centric city here. Everything depends on parking spaces and car dealerships, lots of parking lots, garages, all that stuff is creating stormwater, and that's a huge impact on the water quality here. So that's another like linkage that we want to see in the transportation section of this. And he also mentions it could free up land for affordable housing goals too. So and I think so what our group, my part of I didn't make any slides for my presentation, but we had just been talking to Eric about the sensitive areas chapter, and that seems to be where resilience lives. And Barbara and I had mentioned sensitive areas in development as we know it, as we've known it for many years, is referring to, you know, steep slopes and wetlands, and it has a specific definition in state law. So we were encouraging him to think about having a resilience section as well, you know, putting sustainability all throughout, and also having a resilience section, because, you know, with climate change and the need to prevent further harm and prevent further greenhouse gases, we could have a prevention goals and then adaptation goals. And with rising sea levels, we're going to have to look at our stormwater outfalls, our wastewater outfalls, heat islands, our stormwater treatment standards, and our outfalls, which are, you know, low lying, you know, or might have to be moved up so they can still function. We have heat islands in different parts of the city, and that the new tree canopy report shows us exactly where they are. So we can have tree planting goals there. Our stormwater treatment standards, as we know, for many years, they haven't been up to par, and they've not been up to the new weather. They're backwards looking and not forwards looking. Also, wetlands mitigation, you know, we see development getting approved, right, that has wetlands in it, and there's no room for the wetlands to migrate, you know, inland as the water rises. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed in resilience, and I think it is such a big thing that it does warrant having its own section. And also, this document should be really clear to the public, so they can look at it and find out what the city is doing on resilience, and they might not, you know, might not be looking under the sensitive areas section for the resilience piece. Let's see. I want to open it up to people. Just raise your hand if you want to, if we didn't mention your comments that you put in the chat, if you have comments or questions.
Amy?
Go ahead, Amy. Did you have?
She is
Amy, you might be on mute.
I'm on mute. I don't have a comment. I have a little presentation, but it can wait for us.
Okay. Well, I don't see any hands. So okay. Yeah, you can go. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I am going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle to talk just about preservation. One of the reasons that many of us, I'm from Annapolis, I was born here, but many people moved to Annapolis is because of the success of the historic preservation of Annapolis. It was a huge fight with developers who wanted to develop, rip down all the Peka House and wanted to build a huge hotel there. I think it was a hotel. So anyway, that started historic Annapolis. And so one of the things we're all proud of is how beautiful our city is, because we've been able to restore or keep preserving the historic buildings that, while at the same time still being a modern city. But the preservation ethos should not just be the buildings. It needs to include the natural resources and our water, since we are a city built on water and surrounded by water. And those need the same institutional protection that the historic buildings in Annapolis now have. So our group has talked about a few of these things, and I would like to make a few recommendations from the land and the water aspect. And we believe that the city of Annapolis must invest in preserving and protecting all of its green spaces, water access spots, everything, because all these places are owned by us. They're owned by the citizens of Annapolis. They're not owned by the city of Annapolis. We own these spaces. Truxton Park, Chesapeake Children's Museum, Hawkins Cove, the Weems Whalen property, all the Spa Creek headwaters. We truly believe that all those places and all green spaces owned by the city, owned by us, should be put in some kind of restrictive covenant or some kind of legal maneuver, however that works, maybe not a conservation easement, so that those properties can never be sold and never be developed. Maybe they could be sold, but they'd have to be sold to be used as the same space, same green space or water access spot or whatever that would look like. Because these are public places. It's the epitome of environmental equity that they're open to everyone in Annapolis, open to everyone everywhere. But I think that we need to make sure that those places are all protected for the taxpayers still to come in the generations to come, so that we don't sell off all of our property, all of our waterfront property to make money in order to, I don't know what, do something with that. Not sure what that would be. So again, I know I do a lot of work in the restoration business. So I know that, saying that the city has to take care of all these public lands, we know that requires tons and tons of maintenance. And if there is no maintenance done, then the properties will fail. And, any restoration project that is not maintained, a lot of them are not maintained, will fail, because maintenance is the huge bugaboo in the room for all projects and all lands. The city enacts a stormwater fee on all of us who live in the city. And originally that fee was meant to be used for restoration projects in the city. It's never been used for that. And I don't.
It's enhancement.
What?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. And I don't think that money will ever have enough money in it to do any really meaningful restoration projects. But what it would be perfect for is the maintenance of current and existing restoration projects and current and existing public lands and forested areas. It could be used for maintenance of, as everyone's been talking about, removing the ivy from the trees in all of our headwaters and all of our forested areas and all of our parks. It's a simple project. And we propose that the city dedicate a large proportion of the stormwater fees that we all pay to go for the restoration of green spaces and the restoration of maintenance of restoration projects that groups like the Spa Creek Conservancy have put into the city on city property. So that is one of our recommendations. I know it's not a huge, the comp plan type of overview, but since the city is claiming its credits, its TMDL credits for a lot of the projects that other groups have put into on city property through grant funding, maintenance is a big part of keeping those credits. And the funders, eventually look at that. They inspect them at some point, and if maintenance is not done, then we will lose our TMDL credits for that. So that would be one of our recommendations. And we propose that the city outsource its maintenance on these projects. I know that nobody can do the maintenance on their own. The city does not have the capability. The public works guys do not know how to maintain restoration projects. They could easily cut ivy off of trees, but you can't do that with a weed whacker. So I know that outsourcing maintenance on these things is a very good use of our stormwater fee. And it's something that Spa Creek Conservancy, Watershed Stewards Academy, lots of people know great contractors who are experienced and who know what they're doing in the maintenance of restoration projects. So that would preserve the projects that are already in the ground, which we as volunteers are struggling to maintain, and it's not possible to maintain with volunteers. So I think that the city does need to step up and make sure that, we know that Greenvest was hired to identify all the BMPs and all the projects in the city, which is a great thing. I think it was needed. They needed to have an inventory and see what was working and what was structurally not working, but there's been no maintenance, or at least nobody that I know of has seen any maintenance that has happened on any of these properties since the identification of all the projects. So I think that's something that needs to happen and needs to be included in some way under the land use or greenway part of the comprehensive plan. Then I'd just like to speak for a minute about our creeks. So we all share the goals that of all watersheds, across the whole country. We all want fishable, swimmable waters. And I think we all know the obstacle to those goals in an urban area like Annapolis, and that's all stormwater runoff, of course. So we know the problem, we know the solution, but the people on this call will tell people in the city, less development is needed for our waterways to survive. And the government, city and the municipalities will say more but smarter development is needed to pay for the past less smart development that somebody else let happen. And so groups like the Spa Creek Conservancy then go and get grant funding to then restore what all the old past administrations allowed in the development. And so we believe that to reach this fishable, swimmable status, the preservation of the water quality, certainly the improvement of it, but the preservation has to be front and center in the cities, because every development or redevelopment project in our watersheds could be viewed through the same preservation lens that they use in the historic district for buildings. What will this project mean to Spa Creek's water quality, or to Weems Creek, or to College Creek, or Bat Creek? And what will it mean to the existing natural resources that are downhill of whatever project is on the books? And I think that could be a requirement for a developer to do an assessment of what impact that development is going to have downhill and downwind. And because we know lots of places are flooding out from uphill developments, and the older neighborhoods are getting washed away by the newer neighborhoods, which does not, doesn't seem like a fair thing. So all of us on this call, lots of us have been in the environmental community for a long time. And we all know the creeks, and we know the rivers, and we know the forests, and we know the green spaces and the communities, and we know the problems, and we want to work with the city. We don't expect the city to take care of all these problems. We want to work with the city so that we can all work together to, address the issues, at least share what our problems are and try to work towards solutions together. Some of us on this call are a part of the Waterways Cabinet, which was created a couple of years ago, in the hopes that I think the goal of the Waterways Cabinet was to have local watershed groups or volunteers work with the heads of the city departments to share the problems and share the solutions with each other. So what I thought of it, speaking for myself, I thought we would go to a Waterways Cabinet meeting, and the head of planning and zoning would talk about a development that was coming up. And that was going to be, say, I'll talk about the Spa Creek watershed, something on Spa Road and where it was. And then the Department of Public Works would talk about, how it fit into theirs and what it was going to do to the stormwater, what kind of stormwater management was going to be in there. And then, recreation and parks. And then the watershed groups would say, oh, okay, well, have you thought about, there's this project down below. Is this development going to impact that project down below? We thought it was supposed to be a give and take where the groups, the volunteers, could actually help the city offices and departments, not hinder. We didn't want to hinder. We were hoping to help to get things, the battleground issues that we all share, the permitting and the overdevelopment and the water quality and the green spaces, and work together to protect those and preserve those while keeping our city, moving forward in a way that,
Right.
That makes
And I think it is still like that, Amy, and it hasn't kind of matured yet. It's still kind of growing. So I think it can still serve that function, of course.
Right. Well, that's what I figured.
And we wanted to get departments to work across departments. So if they're,
Right.
if the transportation department was redoing a road, well, let's make that into a green street, and then we can all identify who can, get resources to put in there, or plans and help, and with plantings and things like that, and outreach and grants, and let's get multiple benefits out of our limited public dollars that we're spending, and also
Right.
coordinate with the local groups too. So and also there was a comment about the maintenance issue, and I know we have advocated for this on the Environmental Commission for a long time, is to get some of our minority contractors to get those jobs. And several years ago, Reverend Calhoun had trained up a bunch of young people to do stormwater maintenance, and we thought it'd be great if the city could get them hired, and you'd create jobs and outsource it and create local jobs. It didn't happen, but it still can,
Yeah.
I think that those are good things to get in there too. There was also some comments in here. I wanted to open it up. I think we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to get Carl's comment in here that when we're talking about, creating resilience measures, and we should be mentioning resilience for whom, and we should be looking at the most vulnerable populations who cannot, who, first of all, they approve housing for the most vulnerable populations in the low-lying areas, the flood zones and things like that. And then they are not able to bounce back when they do get hit by a disaster. So I think that that is a really important point. It looks like, you know, we're focusing all of our efforts on City Dock, which is a tourist destination. So, and how much economic benefit does the city actually get from that, you know, from our investment there? And we should be looking at helping the most vulnerable populations among us. Let's see.
Can I just say, you know, one of the things the comp plan is doing, that it's part of the reason why that sensitive areas chapter is so big. And I think the idea of pulling out a resilience chapter from that might make sense, but we were sort of treating the whole city as a sensitive area. You know, our past plans around climate change adaptation are going to focus more on City Dock area, or the, you know, lowest lying places, and we're kind of acknowledging that with the heat impacts, lack of tree canopy in a lot of parts of the city, and other impacts from climate change, that's the consequences are far reaching. And so we have this, I should have mentioned early on, but, you know, we're using the social vulnerability index that the CDC developed to kind of identify where the most socially vulnerable populations are in the city, and just make sure that when we talk about where resources are going and how we're investing in the city, that we're focused on those populations and we're being equitable. You know, what we found is that there are currently city services that are reaching those populations equitably, but certainly not everything. And water access is kind of like, you know, that's the big one that we've clarified is, you know, we could be doing better on. And you know, so College Creek is a place that, you know, we haven't talked about tonight, but I mean, that, you know, my view is a huge opportunity for addressing a lot of what we're talking about here. It has the opportunity to be a waterfront like we don't have in the city. You know, it has a lot of public land that's been underutilized, but it's, you know, it's not, most of it is not city-owned land. It's county, it's St. John's, it's housing authority, it's there's some naval property there, and, you know, there's some state property, there's some cemeteries, and then that's a big idea, I would say, in the comp plan, is to make that area, you know, more of a kind of natural waterfront type opportunity, and really kind of leverage the public land that's there. You know, we're starting with Robert Eads Park, which is at the foot of College Creek. That's the one piece the city does own, and that's, you know, become a huge priority for us.
Very neat. So I know we are coming up close. We're almost at 9 o'clock, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know Zoom fatigue is a real thing. I know I have it. I just wanted to mention balancing historic preservation with environmental resilience, because we're looking at an issue now where we're looking at, you know, hopefully getting a living shoreline over near St. Mary's, and then it's coming into conflict with historic preservation. So I think, you know, as our city, we have a huge historic area, and we really need to be able to balance that and look forward and not backward all the time. And also what you just referred to as, you know, regional cooperation to get some of these things done, because we have all these little pockets of federal land and county land right in sort of inside of our properties with, you know, the schools, which are also great places to do some stormwater projects. I know Prince George's County did a lot of them on school property. But I do want to, I know everybody was going to think of a lot of great things to, you know, to add to the plan, ideas for goals and strategies and things like that, and linkages and, you know, key issues. So I want to give Eric an opportunity to talk about next steps and tell you what to do if you think of something, you know, in the middle of the night or tomorrow while you're while you're recalling this conversation.
Let me share my screen one more time here. I took copious notes on that whiteboard, and we had a couple other people listening and taking notes. I think some of the things that stood out were really just, this need to reinforce environmental sustainability throughout the plan. I think it's been on our minds, but I think the way it has to sort of come through in the format of the document. When somebody looks at it, we can't expect them to sort of put two and two together. There has to be some sort of logic to how the information, the comp plan flows. And I think there's a way to highlight, where we are, the types of things that are contributing to environmental sustainability, and essentially helping people get through the document through some kind of a key or some way of organizing the information, in a way that prioritizes that. And I think this idea that within our core land use chapter, that we really assert the value of environmental enhancement, and almost talk about a kind of paradigm shift in how we approach, growth in the city. And I think there's an opportunity to do that. We want this to be a, impactful document that's well used. So I took some of these comments to heart, and I particularly like the comment about remembering how the city was transformed through, kind of reclaiming historic properties, and the importance of the historic preservation movement, and sort of seeing a kind of parallel in how we think about our environmental resources. And so I think there's a real opportunity there. As I mentioned earlier, just kind of going back to the schedule here, we are going to be continuing to kind of improve on the goals, the metrics, the recommendations into a kind of presentation document that we're going to include on the website in a few weeks, and we'll be announcing that, and probably doing a rollout type event as well. One aspect I didn't mention early that's kind of central to the comprehensive plan is a series of case study sites, 5 sites that we've selected around the city. It's these, unlike the 2009 plan, which had opportunity areas where we wanted to sort of direct redevelopment, these are actually just sites that are places that we think will redevelop in the next 10 years, or should, and could be much better utilized, for the city. And so the former public works facility is one of those sites. The Bay Ridge Shopping Center, where the Giant Food is another one of those sites. These are just places that I think most people would agree are not really the best use of that land, and impervious coverage is just one of those things. But we're going to have a separate kind of website focused on these sites to allow people to comment on them and kind of provide some view of how they could be better utilized. And so the comp plan can provide some guidance there. I don't expect them to be kind of definitive answers, but some guidance is important. And we're going to continue to respond to requests for group meetings. I'm going to be speaking to the Eastport Civic Association on May 20th. I'm going to be doing some walking visits with the Greater Parole Civic Association in the coming weeks. I think we're open to meeting and talking about, comp plan includes a lot of place-based recommendations. I know we've talked a lot tonight about these kind of broad citywide focuses, but there's a lot of place-based recommendation opportunities in the comp plan. So that's important to keep in mind. And then we're going to be kind of continuing to move towards this actual plan document, something concrete in the later summer. The last thing I'll say is, this is a look at our website. At the top is just a comment form. That's kind of one way to share a kind of immediate comment. You can send me an email as well. And we're sort of archiving all of our presentations as we continue to expand. So that's how we're moving forward. And I hope everybody will continue to kind of be involved, and we take this input pretty seriously. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I just want to thank Eric and Alderman Savage for being here tonight, and also thank our small group from the Environmental Commission that's been working on this. And I want you all thank especially the public for being here and giving us all your great ideas and input, and want you to encourage you to keep engaged, and also just hit up that website and send Eric your comments. And we may schedule another meeting in August or after, September, maybe after the initial draft is out, and maybe that will be in person by then. So
yeah, and the transcript of this chat box is going to be kind of amazing, I think. So
yeah, so yeah, let's make sure we capture that before we
we'll have that.
Yeah, I've captured most of it. So
yeah.
And so somebody asked, what are the 5 case study areas?
Yeah, so it's the former Public Works facility on Spa Road. It's the Bay Ridge Shopping Center where the Giant is. It's the Grouse the Grouse Shopping Center in West Annapolis, which is actually part of a West Annapolis master plan that we've done as part of the comp plan, and that'll be released pretty soon. We're just kind of wrapping that up. And then we're looking at the Chinkapin, Forest Drive, Ayers T. Allen area, and kind of because a lot of the problems there, they're transportation related, but I think only through some sort of future property change will, it's hard to really impact the area without kind of an urban design focus. And then the last site is the shopping center at Old Solomon's and West Street, where the Bagels and the Spencery, and it's a site that it's actually partly in the county, but for odd reasons, only half of it's in the city. I think it's one of those places that could be annexed in the future, but that's a site that it seems that the owner of that might be, looking to redevelop in the near future because they really haven't put a whole lot of investment into it. So, yeah.
Oh, and I just see Earl's hand raised. So Earl, did you have a comment or question? If you do, go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'll just take one more question. But I do want to let people go because it is.
Evan, this is LB. I'm going to butt in.
Go ahead.
So these 5 areas that Eric just mentioned. So in the chat, there's also a mention of can we please add Eastport Terrace and Harbor House? There's a lot of concrete there in that area, and that's a very good point.
We're actually working with Sally and I and Teresa Wellman, a few other people from the city have been working pretty closely with the staff from the Housing Authority over the last few months, and we're going to be working with them on a community-based plan for Eastport Terrace. That's a whole separate project that I'm really excited about. I mean, it's forward-thinking. We're basically pursuing federal funding to do this comprehensive planning of that area, and it'll be kind of a grassroots process. And even if we don't get the planning grant from HUD, the intention is to move in that direction through some other means. But we've definitely started to have a pretty collaborative relationship with HACA on that. So we don't want to preempt that process. That's the only reason we're not treating that as a case study site.
It would stay as public housing. I mean, as
No,
affordable housing.
The intent is to actually create a mixed income, mixed use community. And the HUD's Choice Neighborhood Initiative is really the framework for that. If folks are interested, I'll find the link here and can share that. But the idea is to basically focus on retaining the same number of affordable units that are there, but expanding into having other market-based housing and neighborhood services, and kind of really essentially reconnecting that property to the city in a way that is not today. So, and I think
there's a great example of where they did that in Boston in like the 1970s. I just bought the book about it.
Oh, really?
I'll loan it to you.
Well, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, it does focus on a lot of bigger cities, but Norwalk, Connecticut is a place that was awarded a planning grant and has been moving forward on their redevelopment. And, it's another kind of coastal small city. So there's opportunities for a place like Annapolis. And
but would it not lead to more gentrification? We need
the way, the best way to tackle that is by, being kind of comprehensive in retaining affordable housing, and
right.
Not just opening it up to kind of market conditions, so that's the intent of it.
Right.
Yeah, and we have seen, we've seen promises of affordable housing come before, a big development on West Street, and then they get approved, and then at the very end, it's like, well, it's an economic decision. We can't do that. Now we're going to keep it and make it rental properties. So we have to make sure our intent is actually implemented. So it's disappointing, really disappointing when we see it's not.
I think one of the other really important things to the Eastport Terrace Harbor House vision is just that we're doing the Hawkins Cove restoration right now, and so that we can kind of ideally lock in, what's happening there as a key part of what happens with, the overall community in the future, so that's an asset, that we're kind of prioritizing.
Yeah. And I will say that if we do, if we are able to get some land and water conservation funding for that project, when you do use that funding, it's permanently protected. So those people who wanted some permanent protection of areas in our city, let's get that funding and get it on the ground. And that conveys that permanent protection that we really want to see. Okay, so I think, let's see. Yeah, I think we should let everybody go now because it's 9:15 and I hate to cut off great conversation, which always, seems to start right at the end of a presentation. But this has been, I think, very helpful for you, Eric. And we did save the chat, and please continue to talk to Eric, and we will continue to, convene the environmentalists to look at the plan when it's drafted and give you some more input. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah. And thanks, Alderman Savage, for being here all night as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bevan.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bevan.
Thanks, Bevan.
Everybody.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.